Okay, I want to welcome you. Good afternoon. I'm Leslie Sturmer, and I'm with the University of Florida IFAS Shellfish Extension program. So along with the Cedar Key Aquaculture Association and Florida Sea Grant, we are co-hosting a series of hatchery workshops to just address various topics as they come up and as you suggest. And when we can get folks in the field or experts to come talk to you, we will. Actually, we started this off in April or May, I can't remember, with a refresher course on bacteriological monitoring. We had Dr. Susan Larimore and Dr. Ruth Francis Floyd here, and I think that went very well. And based on your input, we're going to continue along. In fact, this fall, we'll try and put together something to address water quality. So your input is important. And that reminds me, there's a blue sheet there that at the end of this workshop, if you would fill that out, that'll kind of remind us what to do next and how to improve upon this series of workshops. So today, what we're addressing is advances in hatchery technology. We couldn't think of a better speaker to come and talk to you about that. So I want to introduce Dr. John Supan. He is the director of the LSU's Louisiana Sea Grant Oyster Research Lab and Hatchery out of Grand Isle. Over 30 years of experience in hatcheries. He's constructed, designed, operated 3 different facilities there in Louisiana. The latest funded through the, not BP, but through the Deepwater Horizon damage assessment funds. So beautiful hatchery. We've been there to see it. Several of us here have been to see it. But he's also one of the most practical persons that I know. So even though he has a beautiful multi-million-dollar hatchery, I think his greatest feat for that hatchery is that he plumbed every bit of it. So very hands-on person, a very good friend. So we're going to start off with him, but I need to do, a little bit of housekeeping. So for those of us here, cell phones vibrate, restrooms immediately out there to your right or down the hall on your right. For those that are joining us through Zoom, and do we know if folks have come in? And they have. So we did have a lot of requests from different parts of the state as well as from out of state to participate in the workshop. So Carter Sear here, who works with us, took it upon himself to put together the Zoom app so you can remotely participate and watch the presentation. And to make sure that he did it right, we have our IFAS communication fellow here, Ben Beach is here, I don't know where. And again, for those that are joining us remotely, I want you to know if you do have any technical problems, don't call me, call Carter at 207-228-5622, okay, 207-228-5622. There are handouts here, again, for those of you joining us remotely. All of these handouts we pulled off the USDA Southern Regional Aquaculture Center website. Very practical, short fact sheets. Also, if you go to my website, the Florida Shellfish Aquaculture website, they're posted there as well as many other references that might be practical to you. There's the South Carolina Manual for Hard Clam Seed Production, no longer in print, but it's there as a PDF file on that website, as well as the FAO Hatchery Manual. I think that's it. Again, I think for the sake of the way we're filming this, that we might hold off questions till the end. However you want, or however you want to do it. So I'm going to take off this mic and you're going to mic up and we'll get started.
It's been said that
I can't see.
a good speaker knows your audience. So first off, I'd like to thank Leslie for her invitation. I love coming to Cedar Key, and I'll take any excuse I can to come and visit. But how many of you work in or manage your own hatchery? Raise your hand. 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The rest of you have any shellfish experience at all? Nursery or grow out people or anything? I've never had a mistress. I've been married 40 years. I never had a mistress, but you know, it's been said that a hatchery is like having a mistress in your life if you're a guy, you know, and they take a lot of time away from your family life. And, you know, I tell people I've been married 40 years because I eat a lot of oysters, and my wife says no, it's because he's only home on weekends, and that's what hatchery life is. You're only home on weekends, but it's a life experience running one, whether it's any bivalve hatchery or a fish hatchery too. It's a life experience, and it's worthy of sharing. And what I want to share with you today are some very practical experiences I've had. This is not end all on this is how you should run a hatchery, because every hatchery is managed differently, because every site is different. And the site dictates how successful or how much trouble you're going to have. But of course, there are things you can be doing in the hatchery that can cause you more trouble. So this is going to be just a little bit of audience participation for this talk. So it's pretty obvious what this is, okay? But at the end of my talk, we're going to go over what kind of problem this little gizmo right here can be. So what I'd like you to do is take it, smell the inside, and pass it on to the next person. And then Leslie, you'll get it at the end and bring it back up front, and we'll get back to this later, okay? So just pass that along. Think about where you would find that in a hatchery. Okay, so this is what I came to in Grand Isle 2 days after Hurricane Katrina, when the tide finally went back down, and they swept all the debris off the road down the Grand Isle. And that was our little oyster hatchery at that time. It was a seasonal hatchery, operated under an old boat shed, but we'd produce 400 million live larvae out of it from 5 months a year because we had exceptionally good water. We were a stone's throw away from Caminada Pass on the Gulf of Mexico, and we had really good water coming by there. And so, and we just goes to show, for you know, $100,000 worth of stuff, and you stuff it underneath an old boat shed. If you got good water, you can crank out lots of quality larvae in a very short period of time. And the reason why it was a short period of time, because it was a boat shed and we couldn't insulate it. There was no sense in trying to start up early in the season when the water was cold, because if we warmed it up, all the heat would escape, because we had no building. We just operated under a shed. So the concept is that you don't build a Taj Mahal in hurricane country. And I used to say that all the time until I built one by myself. Built one ourselves. But what I'm about to really focus on today really began right after Hurricane Katrina, when we lost everything. And this is what we ended up with. The yellow camp is where me and my staff, where the Sea Grant side of the hatchery team stays. And the new hatchery got built right connected to the back, very conveniently, I might add. And we got $3 million from the NERDA, Natural Resource Damage Assessment Funds, for the BP oil spill. That had to be trickled through the state because they were a NERDA trustee. So the hatchery is actually owned by the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. Now, our land is leased from the Grand Isle Port Commission, as is theirs. The laboratory, their big marine lab, is next door. And so we gave up a portion of our lease to them so they could build a hatchery there. And I was on the design team, and it was my dream building. I got everything I ever wanted in a hatchery. I got to put into this thing. I call it my concrete bunker. Okay, nothing is hurricane proof, but it's hurricane resistant. And we went from 4 people working 8 solid hours one day to get ready for a storm in the Gulf. Then we took a breather to see and wait to see just exactly where is it going to go. And once we were certain, yeah, it's really coming, then it took another whole 8-hour day of 4 people to shut the hatchery down, get everything upstairs, let the larvae go, put the broodstock back out in the farm. And of course, they were coming out of cooler water. They hit the hot water and spawned, and they were spent, and get ready for a storm. And then you had the whole thing over again when you went back down to clean up the mess, or that hopefully it didn't even come. So we wanted an elevated building for one reason, to escape storm surge and then get rid of 16 hours of work by trying to save everything. Now everything's upstairs anyway. So that's the reason why the building was elevated. And that's the reason why it's $3 million. If this building were sitting on the ground floor, it would have cost a fraction of that. But because you're elevating all that up above, up to 20 foot of sea level, above sea level, you got to spend, it costs $3 million. This is just another view of it. And we'll pull the trigger here. These, you might be familiar with these insulated glass block. It's common to see them in some houses, especially like bathroom windows and things like that. The reason those are on there is because many years ago, when I was going back home to Louisiana from a visit to Cedar Key, I stopped and saw the Naval Air Museum in Pensacola. I like museums. And I got there that afternoon, 4 o'clock, and the front wall of that building is all this insulated glass block. And the sun was hitting that directly on. And when I walked in that building, the light coming through that glass block wall was just dazzling. And I went, boy, this make a good algae room. And I've always remembered that. So when it came time to build my hopefully final algae room, this is what we put in to try to keep the heat out of the room. But unfortunately, everything around, all this concrete around the windows heats up anyway, so we still have a thermal problem in that room that we had to address with more air conditioning. What I'm gonna, usually when people come by the hatchery for a tour, I start them out downstairs. Now, all the larval rearing and algal rearing and broodstock maintenance and all of that is upstairs, all the wow stuff, but downstairs is the guts of the hatchery. And you can make out right here some storage tanks and all. We're going to get into that in more detail right now, because I no longer use the word filter. I like the word polish, because we are constantly polishing water all the time. We don't have water come out of the bay and go right into the hatchery and leave anymore. It goes into tank, it gets pre-filtered, or what we call primary filtration. It gets stored to 20 microns in a tank, and we polish it for 24 hours before we use it. We're not trying to get out all the rotifers and zooplankton, and we're also treating the water best we can to prepare it for the hatchery upstairs. And we also have, what's nice is when you're in the breeding business, or even just in the hatchery, and you're spawning lots of broodstock, it's nice to have your farm right out front where you can just go out and get what you need and check it and bring it in. It's a perfect site, especially for our breeding program. Those of you who grow triploids, they're made from tetraploids, and we are the tetraploid breeding program for the Gulf of Mexico. So a lot of you people in the hatchery business who are making triploid oysters have gotten broodstock from us. So this is downstairs. And we have 3 8,000-gallon tanks here. And what we'll do is, and other things you can see here is this plumbing right here is for what we call recirculating. When we go into recirculating mode, this has all been taken out now, and we have this it now set up above these tanks to drop into tank C or tank B. On this side, these are 2-inch valves with the quick connects. We hook up these green hoses to. This is where we draw the water out of the tank to send it upstairs. We'll cover this in a moment. These are some cartridge filters with a pump right here that sends the water upstairs to go to the hatchery. But the polishing effort is behind on the other side of the tanks, and you can see 2 of them right here. Now we're on the other side. And after Hurricane Katrina, I couldn't wait to get rid of our old sand filters. How many of y'all have sand filters? Anybody? Yeah, they're notorious. Sand filters, if you know, probably know, they can crack when you have a lot of water pressure in there and they start to clog. The sand bed you can't see it, but the sand bed can get a crack or a fissure in it. And then the water flows to the path of least resistance, goes right down the crack, and it becomes less efficient. And they're extremely heavy. And thinking I was going to have a dream hatchery one day in an elevated building, I found out that the footprint on the sand filter is very high, heavy. The hatchery was designed upstairs with a 200 pound per square foot load range, which allowed me to put 1,000 gallons of water anywhere I wanted to upstairs. A sand filter has a heavier footprint than that, because the way they're constructed, all the weight is focused on one small pad. So I wanted to go lighter, and also I wanted to get rid of sand because they're also notoriously dirty. And I never felt I never felt clean after cleaning a sand filter. Even after we backwashed it and we took the lid off and scrubbed the inside above the sand, and then we ran bleach through it and everything else, which, you know, you never get all the bleach out. I never felt that we ever had that thing clean. So I got introduced to what's called the spin clean technology. These are disc filters. And this little unit right here is expensive. It's $32,000. But what it does is the whole hatchery I set up at 50 gallons a minute. And so this is set up for 50 gallons a minute, where it's got and it's all under very high pressure. This is did I turn this on? Oh, there it goes. This is a 10 horsepower pump right here. And we're sucking water out of, in other views, there's a blue tank here we're having raw bay water get pumped into. And then we're sucking the water out of that, and it runs through these 2 pods here for 100 micron, and then these 4 pods for 20 microns, and then we fill a tank. And we can fill a tank, an 8,000 gallon tank, in about 4 to 5 hours. That's about the flow rate. The beauty of this technology is that it is, and here's another look at it. The control panel on this thing has a little computer chip in it. So based on the pressure differentials in the manifolds, it determines when to backwash. But what it's backwashing is not sand, but plastic discs that stack on a spline. And these discs have grooves on it. And this one in particular is part of the 20 micron pods. And the water flows from the outside in. And so these things are under high compression. They're squeezed really, really tight by this machine. And the water flows from the outside in through these grooves. And then there's a spline on the inside that's receiving the clean water. And then when the control panel decides it's time to backwash, one at a time, this solenoid valve right here, you see them here, are commanded to release the compression and reverse the water flow from the inside out. And the way the splines on the inside, they're like a jacuzzi pipe. They have these almost like jacuzzi-like jets. They receive the water, but when the water is going out in a backwash mode, it makes these plastic discs spin. So they call it a spin clean system. And it's really cool. And what's nice about it, this thing weighs a fraction of a bead filter or a sand filter. And it also you can get things incredibly clean. And if you set your hatchery up the way we do, to where you have storage tanks to hold your water for 24 hours, you're only going to operate this for about 6 hours. And you can turn it off. You can drain all the seawater in it, hook up a freshwater hose and flush it and flood it full of fresh water, and then just shut it down and let it soak fresh water all night long until you go to use it next time. This thing stays really, really clean. I would not even attempt to consider this thing if raw bay water ran through it 24/7. It would get so fouled on the inside, and all those manifolds and all these solenoid heads and everything. It would be a royal mess, in my opinion, on constant raw bay water. But if you set it up right with the way to just pulse use it and then drain it and clean it, it can be a really nice feature for keeping your maintenance costs down. But they are expensive. So that was one of the first things I invested in after Hurricane Katrina. As you're thinking of standing on the back side of the tanks, as we are now, between the tanks, okay, these are 4-inch drains coming from the bottom of the tanks. There's drains in the center on the bottom. And then there's these 4-inch gate valves that we can direct the water flow from one tank or the other tank. And right here at the T is a quick connect where we hook up our big 2-inch flexible hoses to be able to draw water from the tank to wherever we want it to go. And where we want it to go, first of all, is this bead filter here has its own pump. And right here, you see these green hoses. Right now, we have a green hose coming from one of the T's over here, the gate valves, runs along the ground or floor, hooks up to this pump. And this pump is sending water through the bead filter, which gets us down to 10 microns. And then it leaves the bead filter, goes through UV light. If we're in a recirculating mode, we'll turn that on and use it. And then it leaves the UV light and it goes through a protein skimmer. And then the water comes out of the protein skimmer, and you see these gate valves here, and there's others down the way, and the water runs through a 4-inch manifold and discharges in whatever tank we want to. So the reason why we have all this is for polishing purposes. here's our protein skimmer. I'm very proud to say I got that used for a fraction of the price of new. But, and the reason why it looks stained like that is it's because at the previous facility it was used, they used ozone instead of air. And the ozone etched the plastic on the inside a bit. We don't use ozone in our facility because our humidity is so high, you'd spend a fortune keeping up on dryers to dry the air out before you use the ozone generator. But right here's where we hook up the green hose from the UV light. And then all this is about pulling dissolved organics out of the water. You ever walk along a shoreline, you see foam on a seashore. That's an indication that there are dissolved organics in the water. So when you aerate water, if you have a high dissolved organic load in the water, it creates foam. And the foam is created by the colloidal, and it's also chemical bonds that allow these complex organic chemicals and compounds to cling to the surface of the air bubble. And so it creates foam. And if you're familiar with protein skimmers, the idea is you just have this super saturated air emulsion almost going on here as the water flows through it at 50 gallons a minute or more. And then the foam builds up, comes up through a funnel up in here, condenses, and then that condensation comes down here and is removed from the water. That condensation, if you've been around anybody who dips snuff and spits into a cup, have you ever seen that? That's what that stuff looks like. It looks like tobacco spit coming out of here. So here's the blue tank where our raw water comes into. It goes through the bead filter or goes through the disc filter, fill up an 8,000 gallon tank, and then we hook a green hose to that tank and we run it through our bead filter, UV light, and protein skimmer for 24 hours. And the pump on that bead filter is the flow rate on that allows us to turn that 8,000 gallon tank over 17 times in 24 hours. So we're giving that bead filter plenty of time to polish that water down to 10 microns. We're giving that protein skimmer plenty of time to pull dissolved organics out of the water. And we can literally, after about 8 hours, you no longer see that tobacco spit coming out of it anymore. We pulled all the, and it's no longer making foam. We've pulled the dissolved organics out of the water. So protein skimming is really handy for polishing water. And we got this one here for the flow rate we needed. So I strongly advise using them to clean your water up with. This is a new feature at the hatchery we just got this year. Grand Isle is famous for the Grand Isle International Tarpon Rodeo the last weekend in July. Been like, I don't know how many years. Seemed like forever. And we call them parishes instead of counties. But the parish, in their wisdom, wants to help beautify the island for the rodeo. So they come down and they start spraying the ditches with weed killer. And you can tell when they start doing that because it starts showing up in the hatchery in one way or another. The algae starts, well, that don't look right. And it just, and when I complain about it, they just tell me to go to hell. So what we had to do is come up with, okay, so we are getting traces of this herbicide in the water because it's running off into the back bay. So we got this activated carbon system here. And the reason why, by the way, I forgot to mention, most of these expensive systems that we have are on trailers, dedicated trailers. That's our hurricane plan. We can haul stuff out of the way when it's time. This one we put on a plastic pallet, so we can come over here with a pallet jack, grab it, put it in our cargo lift, and send it upstairs. So everything's got a hurricane plan downstairs. But this is designed to, after the tanks have been polished for 24 hours down to 10 microns, then we'll hook a green hose to that tank, and it will start running the water through the activated carbon. And right before, that's the tank we'll start using to send upstairs. So we can polish. So that's our primary right here. Our secondary is our bead filter. You could call this tertiary. But what's also a tertiary is on the other side here is where we're drawing water again on this side of the tanks, and this pump is sucking it out of the tank, run it through 2 1-micron nominal cartridge filters, and sending it upstairs. Again, this is no longer there, but we have it rigged up to where the water coming down from upstairs can either get sent back to the bay, and we call that flow through mode. Even though we're holding the water, we're polishing the water for 24 hours before we use it. Or we can keep the water and polish it and reuse it. And we have successfully reared oyster larvae nearly all season in recirc mode. The reason why I designed the hatchery, it's very easy to design a hatchery for recirculation if it's elevated off the ground. All your storage tanks are underneath it. It's very simple. Just about anybody can come up with a method of catching water in a tank and sending it back upstairs. There's nothing to that. What's the hard part is making sure your water chemistry doesn't change in that process. So our plumbing is a bit different now than it is then this picture was taken. But water chemistry is key to reusing water. So what we do now is a dear friend of mine runs Whiskey Creek Oyster Hatchery in Netarts, Oregon, Sue Cudd. And they're the ones that literally put hatcheries and ocean acidification on the map. She started experiencing major die-offs in her larvae. And at first they blamed it on a Vibrio issue, but then it really came down to ocean acidification dropping her pH. And after a great deal of angst and great deal of support from Oregon State University and other universities, they took a very close look at her water chemistry and realized that it was a calcium, it was an aragonite problem. Aragonite is a form of calcium carbonate, and it's associated with shell growth in bivalves. And what they came up with a simple solution to adjust her pH with soda ash to bring the pH up. And what she found is that as long as they can maintain the pH in their hatchery at 8.25 with soda ash use, that it solved their larval shell problems or larval mortality problems. So what we've done now is what we do. We have this is what we call one of our research tanks. It's a 55-gallon tank, and we'll mix up a saturated solution of soda ash. And when our pH isn't what we want it to be, and we'd like to see it at 8.25 as well, we'll go ahead and make up a solution of soda ash, and we have a pH pump here with and it looks very much like a pH wand that you would have on a pH meter. We drop it in any one of these 3 tanks that we care to, and then this is pumping the solution into the tank, and it's reading it. And we set this for 8.25, and when it reaches it, the pump shuts off. And so that whole 8,000-gallon tank of water, as it's being polished, we can adjust the pH with soda ash solution and get the pH exactly where we want it to be before we send it upstairs. This is a very nice way of treating a pH problem, and it's fairly simple, fairly simple. So RASS means Recirculating Aquaculture System, and we test our water, whether we're in recirc mode or whether we are in flow-through mode. Again, flow-through isn't straight from the bay upstairs and out. It's being filtered, polished for 24 hours, then used. But even in that mode, we're testing for all these parameters. And there are some early research on ammonia nitrite and nitrate on oysters, and because they are facultative anaerobes, which means they can, because oysters, they can close their shells and be out of water for long periods of time. And they go through almost an anaerobic respiration during that time. What happens is typically marine animals excrete ammonia, but a closed oyster, if that oyster's been closed for several hours and you crack it open and you catch the oyster liquor that runs out of that liquid water, or oyster liquor as we call it, runs out, and you check that, the nitrite is extremely high. So they're not, and when you look at that early research, the levels of what they call sublethal dose, where the oysters stop pumping, is extremely high. It's over 1,000 milligrams per liter. And to give you an idea, that a 0.5 milligram per liter level of nitrite in the water will kill a blue crab. So they are extremely hardy when it comes to ammonia and nitrite. They almost produce nitrite as a byproduct of their anaerobic respiration when they're closed up. So we monitor these, but I'm not so concerned about it. What's concerning is they make their shell out of calcium carbonate, okay? That's lime, that's the alkalinity, and that's the carbonate that's in the water and the hardness. So we're mostly interested in these right here, because these are particularly important in shell formation in the larval shell. So, so hardness, alkalinity, pH, chemical oxygen demand, that's just a way to measure your dissolved organics. Because again, I think you all know what biological BOD or biological oxygen demand is. It's the biology of the water. It's the bacterial flora. It's the living flora of the water that's consuming oxygen. A chemical oxygen demand is the chemicals in the water that's consuming the oxygen. So we measure COD in particular. We don't measure BOD, but COD we're interested in because basically when that raw water is hitting our blue tank and then our disc filter is about to suck it out of that tank and run it through the discs and send it to our storage tank, that raw water is cascading in that tank. And if we see a lot of foam floating on the top of that tank, we take note of that, on what % coverage that is. Now, there's foam from really clean, high salinity water that makes that pretty white foam and it dissipates immediately. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a brown foam or a tan foam or even a gray foam that builds up and hangs around the edge of the tank and just floats there and tends to get a little thicker and thicker and thicker over time. That's the dissolved organics. And that tells us a lot about what we're trying to do is correlate our data on what % coverage that raw water tank has with foam to what our COD levels are. And then that also is telling us a lot. We're also measuring how much tobacco spit is coming out of the protein skimmer. And what we're trying to do is correlate COD level, foam occurrence, and the amount of dissolved organics that's being removed by the system. So COD is real important to us. And Vibrio. Vibrio is a general term for those bacteria that are natural to the environment. Thank God for Vibrios, because they're chitogenous, means they eat chitin. So without Vibrio bacteria and a lot of other bacteria out there, we'd be up to our butts in shrimp and crab shells. So Vibrio bacteria are part of nature's way of recycling that protein that shells are made out of, crab shells and shrimp shells. But they can also be problematic in a hatchery, and it usually has to do with poor maintenance. So, and to test for Vibrio, and you've had this workshop already, just quickly go, I took this off Wikipedia today, but you use a certain type of auger that only allows the Vibrios to grow. And in our case, what we do is we monitor weekly. We'll go out and grab a water sample out of the bay where our intake line is, and then we grab a water sample out of the storage tank, and then we'll take before we treat it, and then we take water upstairs in the hatchery where the larvae are, and these individuals, you got to do a certain dilution so that your cultures aren't touching one another, but then you can do the counts and determine what levels of Vibrio you have in the bay water, in your treated water, in the water that you're using. We do that once a week. So here's our parameters then. We want our alkalinity in the water to be around 150 to 180 milligrams per liter. And so if it's below that, then we'll use that small tank and we'll make up a saturated solution of sodium bicarbonate, which is baking soda. And then we'll pump that into the system this we're monitoring by hand. We don't have a pump for that, but we monitor it by hand until it reaches that level. Hardness, amount of calcium in the water. So we want that to be around 200 milligrams per liter. And if it isn't, then we can use calcium chloride, and we make up a saturated solution of that, pump it into the tank. And the same, and I mentioned the soda ash already. So these are three that are very important to us when we're reusing water, because now we know that these chemicals are at the right levels for the larvae to have enough alkaline or aragonite in the water to form their shells. Because most of the time, the history of ocean acidification and oyster larvae in hatcheries, it was expressed by shell deformation, and which meant that they were starving for calcium or starving for carbonate. We also have, because I started now we go into recirc mode, I'm thinking, okay, so everything you pour down the floor drain comes back up. It's in the system. So essentially, the floor you're walking on is part of your recirculating system. Your channel drains, everything you dump on the floor, it ends up downstairs, and it can come back upstairs again. So one of the first things I wanted to quit using is bleach. You know, you can dechlorinate with sodium thiosulfate, everybody knows that, but bleach and chlorine in the water forms things that you're not testing for, especially chloramines particularly, the chlorine binds to certain proteins in the water and forms what we call chloramines. You're not testing for that. And and then you can have ionic problems because chlorine has a negative charge and all that stuff. So anyway, I wanted to get away from chlorine. So I visited my colleague, John Hawk at LSU at the Animal Vet Science Lab up there, and was seeking his advice. And Dr. Ralph Portier, our environmental science professor there on campus, and they said, why don't you use peroxide, hydrogen peroxide? And we're all familiar with hydrogen peroxide. You know, it's a disinfectant. We put it on our skin. You know, you can go buy bottles of it, a pint bottle of it at your local store for 85 cents. And it's a perfectly good disinfectant. So you can buy a 55-gallon drum of 35% peroxide and have it delivered to your place. And what you can do is dilute it down. Actually, this is used as a, I'm going to read this to you, external microbiocide for the control of mortality of freshwater reared finfish eggs due to sapropelaginiasis, which is some kind of bacterial infection. I murdered that word. In freshwater reared salmonids or salmon, okay? So they use this to treat eggs in certain freshwater fish culture conditions. So we bought a 55-gallon drum of this, and we're using that now instead. And how we do this is we mix up 7 parts of this 35% peroxide to 1 part of fresh water, and it gives us a 5% solution. That's the same percent solution in a bottle, pint that you buy from the store. And then we'll make up a 200-liter tank of this stuff, again, one of those small white 55-gallon tanks. And so that we can use that to disinfect our tanks. We can use that to, we'll put a submersible pump in it. And what we'll do is we'll disinfect our seawater lines monthly. So we'll drain all our lines, and we'll fix up a tank of this stuff, and we'll put in a submersible pump, and we'll hook it up to a quick connect on one of our seawater lines, and we pump it through the whole hatchery. And then we give it a 10-minute soak, and then we flush it with fresh water and then hatchery seawater. And we do that once a month to all of our seawater lines. And then we use it for daily tank cleaning. And I always, every now and then, I like to take a little medicine dropper and get some of that and find a scab on me and make sure it foams up so I know the concentration is just right. But this stuff here is really nice replacement for chlorine. And what's beauty about it is when it breaks down, it forms water and oxygen when it dissipates. So it's a lot less hazardous. But you have to be careful because at 35%, this stuff is extremely caustic. And it will burn your skin. You sure as hell don't want to get it in your eyes. You have to be very careful on how you handle it. When you take it out of the 55-gallon drum, we have what's called a drum pump, where you screw it down into the bung hole, and then you're pumping it up and down like a small bilge pump for a small boat. But it's coming out, and then we're catching it in a 5-gallon bucket with fresh water in it already. And then we're wearing acid gloves up to your elbows, and we're wearing eye protection because this stuff is nasty in full strength. But once you get it down to 5%, you know, it's very safe to use. So you got to be careful about using it. But no more careful than you do handling bleach. And you get bleach in your eyes, you're going to be sorry too. All right, so back downstairs. So here's our big Bubba filters, appropriately named because we're down south. And these are 1 micron nominal, okay? We will still get rotifer eggs upstairs through this stuff. Even after we polish for 24 hours, rotifers are notorious for us. So we are always polishing the water wherever we can because our goal is we want to keep the zooplankton out of the hatchery. Once it goes upstairs, it goes into our new seawater heating system. We can take 15 degrees centigrade water and bring it up to 28 in one pass with this. It has 1 million BTU heating capacity. The heat exchanger is right here. It's out of the picture. So we can either heat the water. This allows us to start up in the wintertime, of course, and run very late. But by about middle of May, we shut this down because we don't need to heat the water anymore. And our bay water might get up to 32 degrees centigrade in the afternoon, like right now. I just measured it the other day. But after it sits in the shade of that building and gets pumped for 24 hours and polished, the temperature drops down to 28 in the shade. So it's a way to cool the water down if you're in a shallow bay area during the summertime. So this is upstairs, and the water's coming in about right here somewhere, and it gets split up into this is our hatching tanks where when we're doing what I call production broods, we're cranking out lots of larvae, we're hatching them, the eggs out here until they reach about 60 microns on a harvest, they stay on a 60 micron screen, and then they're put into our flow through high density system here. So it has its own manifolds as well. Over here are our research tanks for our breeding program, where you're doing single family crosses and very small research broods. You don't need a tank space. So we have airlines here, airlines here, airlines here, and then water distribution here. Here's our drops down here for our utility lines, quick connects here, and we have a cartridge filter a capability at each place. So when we're hooking up a hose to fill these tanks, it's going through a 1 micron cartridge filter. I think that's all the features I wanted to cover on that picture. Okay, so this is a reservoir that receives our 1 micron water from downstairs for our high density system here. This gives me 8 hours of water for that whole system. So if the day's coming at that day of the month where we want to drain the lines, seawater lines, and fill it with hydrogen peroxide for 10 minutes, this system keeps running because it has its own reservoir. Every system in the hatchery, other than the research tanks, have their own reservoir for that system, so that if we have to shut down to do maintenance chores, everything just keeps running. It has its own water supply for a while. Right here again is another cartridge filter. What I like about polishing, okay, so this thing is just sucking water out of the tank, sending it up, and most of it goes right back into the tank. And then some of it goes into the manifolds for the flow-through system as needed. So this pump is woefully oversized for the system. So what we're doing is we're just polishing. We're just sending the water through a cartridge filter and back into the tank like this, and then just shunting off of the little bit of water that we need at a time. And so even though we're storing this water for the system, we're also polishing at the same time, over and over and over and over, 24 hours a day. So we're changing that cartridge filter out once a day. If you put it on our what we call our night chores, you change the filter out to a fresh filter so it doesn't clog overnight while we're all asleep. When you come in the next morning, it's filthy. Even though it's been through everything downstairs, it still shows up dirty. So fortunately, we go through a lot of these. So we found a source where we can buy them for $2 a piece, and we buy cases of things. A reservoir here then again gives us plenty of time to continue our polishing even upstairs. Okay, now we're looking down. This is the tank I just described. The first picture I showed you of upstairs, I was standing over here to take a picture this way. Now we're looking in the opposite direction. And here we have the manifolds coming up. This is your manifold for your algae. And I know that because on each end we have a valve right here. So if we want to get buckets of algae from the algae room, all we got to do is just open up a valve here and catch it out of this manifold. Each one of these tanks has a flow meter for algae, has a flow meter for the salt water coming from this tank. So we can set the exact flow rates for flow through larval production here with the flow meter here and then the feed here. Any of y'all have a high density system in your hatchery? They're wonderful. They are wonderful. You still got to drain them every day, but they're small volumes. And now it allows you to go from traditional static cultures where you may stock anywhere from, well, you start out with 100 eggs per milliliter. And then D-stage larvae for oysters, you go to 10 per milliliter. And then when they reach about 150, 180 microns, you want to cut them down to 5 per milliliter. And if you really feel adventurous, you can keep that stocking density through Pettivelger, or you traditionally drop it down to 1 per ml for Pettivelgers when they're ready to set. These tank with this system here, because what you're doing, the water's flowing through the system and down the drain, you're flushing out all the turds. You may not realize this, but larvae produce a lot of waste, okay, because they're eating a lot of algae. And the reason why static systems, especially in the Pacific Northwest, the hatcheries up there that grow, 8 billion larvae a season, they grow them in these huge flat bottom tanks, 32,000 gallon tanks, some of them. And the whole idea is you're just giving time for all that waste to settle to the bottom. Okay, your larvae are up here swimming, of course you're aerating, so you've got current going on up there, but all that larval waste and dead algal cells are sinking to the bottom, and then you drain the tanks and then you flush all that away. With this, what you're doing is you're flushing it away all the time. The challenge with these systems is that because you're in small volumes, those larvae are bumping against the walls of the tanks a lot more often than in a very large tank. So, and it's the walls, it's the surface on the inside of the tanks is where that can harbor bacterial growth, because bacteria love to cling to things. So, the trick of this system is keeping it ultra clean. But you can go up to, I've heard one person claim they can go 500 larvae per ml on these things. We don't go over 100. But one of these conicals, we can grow 40 million larvae. And that's what gives us the capacity to be able to crank out the larvae if the industry needs it. So it's a great system. And it doesn't have to be a conical. You can use a flat bottom tank to set one of these up. It also, you know, you're delivering. So here's water coming out of the saltwater flow meter, and then right here is algae coming out from the algae flow meter, and then it has what's called a banjo screen in the center, and that's a screen that keeps the larvae from being flushed out. And then it's aerated from the bottom, right here. So this is the valve on the bottom of the conical, and air is coming in. And what it does is what you want to do is set it up so that you have such a curtain of bubbles around your banjo screen that it's washing the larvae off the screen, so they don't cling to the screen and clog it. So getting the air, it's almost like a rapid boil that you would think in a pot of water. Again, here's the water coming in, seawater and algae right here, and that's being dumped right over top of the banjo, but it's not like all this is getting sucked out of the tank because you have so much rolling action with the aeration coming from the bottom. But conicals are lousy for static cultures. You know, I've got to, so, you know, sometimes we really don't need a whole lot of larvae, and we got some, and we don't want to, the 1,200 gallon tanks that we call hatching tanks are too big for that little brood. But I don't like growing larvae in a conical and static culture because there's no place for especially if you're delivering air from the bottom, all the waste from the larvae that want to settle to the bottom are just getting redistributed up again. So I don't really like using conicals for static cultures at all, but they're really good for flow-through systems. And here's a close-up of the banjo screen. We buy the housings from the same guy in Sheldon, Washington that builds the tanks, Marine Fiberglass Products in Sheldon, Washington. Everybody calls him Fiberglass Bill. But we can get the housings. This is just a thin wall PVC pipe. But I like these because they come in two parts. And what we do is we buy some butyl rubber sheets from Granger, and we'll make our own rubber bands, and then we can put these together. And what's beauty is you can take it apart and clean. If you put your screen on both sides, then you can't take it apart. The only way you can clean the inside out is through the screen. It's not very good. So this is a great little banjo screen to do. You got to just do all this. You got to connect these with epoxy. And then you got to watch handling them because that epoxy can break loose. And it's got a 45-degree elbow on that to get it at the right angle when it sits in the tank. So that is flow-through systems. Now, we're a breeding program, and because when you're making triploids, you do not want to have a diploid male contributing to the brood because that you won't get 100% triploidy there. So you only want to use sperm from a tetraploid male. Now, if you want to preserve your brood stock, then you don't want to strip spawn them. It's easy to make triploids if you strip spawn because you just crack open an oyster, you check the gonad under a microscope, and if it's a female, you use it, you strip spawn, catch all the eggs, get them all into a bucket, you add your sperm from your tetraploid male, and you make triploids. But if you want to conserve your brood stock, especially if you're a breeding program, and none, commercial hatcheries aren't, but you may want to save some of your brood stock for the future, you want to spawn them individually. Now, Scott Reichert's the first one I ever knew that used what we call zebrafish rearing tanks, which are a small fish that's used for research. He built his own rack and started using these. And when we seriously get into tetraploid development, we bought one of these, had the system made so we can individually spawn oysters in them. So we know which parents are going to contribute exactly to the brood. We can have this in flow-through mode at first, and then once the oysters are open and start pumping, we can switch this to recirculating mode if we want to hit them with warm water. Anyway, this is a beautiful little rig. It's about $5,000, but it allows you to select which parents you're using for your breeding purposes. Again, it's very handy to have when you're making triploids from natural spawns. So that's the rack over here. And again, this is the wall on that side of the hatchery where all of our research tanks are. Really, these are probably too small for a commercial hatchery. I recognize that. but we're both have commercial scale capability and research capability. So these are what we use for our research birds. Just another tour of the hatchery. Now we're inside what we call the lab, the room in the building. One of the first purchases we wanted to do was increase our ability for autoclaving. So we bought a larger autoclave. Now we can stick a 5-gallon glass carboy in here if we want to and steam it and autoclave it, sterilize it. That runs on 220, 240 volt. And now we're inside what looks like a closet door. You open it up, and we took the shelves and turned inside there, and we turned it into our algal stock room. And we're one of the first hatcheries that started using LED lighting. If you look for LED lights on the internet to buy for algae culture, they're extremely expensive. What we came up with, it was a very low-cost way to use LED lights. You can go online to ledwholesale.com and order these 16-meter spools of LED light strips. And you can order what color you want them in, and they're peel and stick. They got a 3M backing on it. You just peel it and they'll stick. And what we found out is they don't like sticking to painted shelves. So another thing is the year before we moved in this building, we started thinking about LED lights and we started evaluating at our earlier site, which was an open air hatchery underneath the building next door. And what we were concerned about immediately was LED light strips aren't nearly as luminous as a 40-watt fluorescent bulb. 40-watt fluorescent bulb that we're all used to seeing in a stock room or for lighting algae was a lot brighter. And we were concerned, okay, well, the idea is you go to LED lights because you can pick the color of lighting that you order. So you may not have learned this in high school, but plants don't use olive white light. They primarily use the red and blue wavelengths. So with LED lighting, it lets you focus on those two. That's why you primarily see red and blue where we're using these. But it wasn't very luminous. So my idea, this is my very small contribution to algal culture, is you use mirrors. And it turned out that, so we had some mirrors custom made for the bottom and the top up underneath here. And we took all the shelves down, we turned them upside down, and I went to our glass place in Covington, Louisiana, where I live, and had the mirrors custom made. And I said, how would you mount these to the bottom of the shelf? And he reached over and had a tube of this black stuff that you put in a gun, like silicone glue. And he says, you just zigzag this stuff on there, press the mirror on there. If you got a few heavy books, lay it on there, let it sit up overnight, and they're never going to fall down. So you knew exactly what to use. And which, again, when we put that on the bottom now we had a nice clean surface to stick that strip to, and it worked perfectly. And so what we did is these strips go from here to here. They're about 9 feet long, and we just drilled holes through the upright portion of the shelving to run these strips through, stuck them to the glass, and then all the wiring are at the end, and we wrapped it up, and down here are the transformers plugged, to power these. These are 12 volts. So you got to transform from 110 to 12 volt. So we did all this ourselves. We built all this ourselves. But what this does is now you have light, you have a mirror up here, you have a mirror down here, and you can picture the light bouncing between the mirrors. And the algae grows like nuts in here. It is I was really upset that this stock room has no windows in it, no natural sunlight coming through. Well, this answered it right here. And they're cool. They don't put out any heat. So this is a white one right here, and then we have blue and red, blue and red. We no longer need to use the white. And what's funny is when you look at this with your naked eye, the white looks pale green, because the blue and red light are so close to your eyes that the white light actually comes over as green. But these are our cultures here, and of course we're using 0.25 micron bacterial discs for our incoming air, and you can more clearly see the lights and the mirrors here. But mirrors in your stockroom are a simple thing you can do, and I'm telling you, it's great. Because now you're illuminating up from the bottom as well. But again, you can see the mirrors here and the cultures. These are kind of young. Some of them are pretty pale yet. But I guess everyone. How we aerate these a little differently. I sent our 2 phycologists to Gary Wickver's workshop at Milford, Connecticut, NOAA lab. And they learned some great little tricks in here and making sure you keep your stock cultures clean. And one of them was making your air, let me go back, making your air discharge lines come down, because if you just end here with a little piece of glass, you can get condensation right there. And condensation's wet. And bacteria love moist surfaces. And then that can all drip back down. Even though you got positive air pressure coming down, that can be a source of contamination right there just because you're getting condensation in there. So just by adding that piece of tubing right there, condensation, if you get any, can drain out, along with the air that's blowing out of there as well. So that's just a little trick that they learned while they were at that workshop. One more look at the stock room. And here's our timers. So we have all this set up on timers. So the transformers down here, and then I wired all this with SO cable to come into these, we bought these timers at Home Depot, plug them into our outlets here, and then we can set those up for all these lights to shut down, and that stock room can go through a dark cycle in the middle of the night. Of course, you always want to maintain a little, your starter cultures, just in case if you have a catastrophe, you got something you can start the whole thing back up again with. We use these 3-liter Farmbach flasks to start our bag cultures 2 rooms over, which I'll get to next. And you can probably already know that you can take these and clamp these off, take them into the other room, hook an air hose to them, and blow the algae out into your bag. You don't have to open up the rubber stopper and expose it all to air. You can just blow the algae out. Oh, while we're still in there, this is we have a little regenerative blower that supplies air to our stock cultures. That got to be a little noisy in that small room. So we punched a hole through that concrete wall. We have the blower mounted on the other outside where the larval room is, because there's lots of noise over there. And then, but our HEPA filtered, we're sucking the air. This room is air conditioned. So we're sucking cool air conditioned air here through a HEPA filter, comes back out and goes through a UV light that's designed for air, not water. And so we're UV treating, we're disinfecting the air after HEPA filtration before it goes to the manifold to the algae. And then this is our CO2 bottle for dosing for CO2. And we have this all metered. And this is a timer right here for dosing the CO2. You can see the line coming in right here. So all this is set up to where it takes very little attention on our part. We have as much automation as we possibly can without getting crazy. We don't have computer operated stuff. I know you can do that. But this is simple little bits and parts you can buy from Grainger catalog and set this up so you don't have to tweak it all yourself. It just takes care of itself. Of course, that growing algae is all about monitoring pH. Carbon dioxide bubbled into water forms carbonic acid. It drops the pH. But during photosynthesis, it creates an alkalinity effect, and the pH rises during high photosynthesis. So what you're doing is you're monitoring, you're setting your pH, your CO2 level to maintain the right pH in the algae cultures. I'm sure you already know that. When you're doing we decided to, in the old days, I used to just open up the cap of a flask. I flamed it, and I'd pour a new. I did it as quick as I could to start another flask culture and cover it up in a living room or in a kitchen. Well, we decided, since we got a little money from a hurricane disaster relief, FEMA, to buy one of these. So this is actually what they call a PCR hood. PCR is polychromal reaction. Yeah, polychromal. Yeah, thank you. Anyhow, it's used in a laboratory for that kind of work, but it is a perfect hood for transferring cultures in a clean environment. Well, you have a UV light up under here. You have a HEPA filter here, and you have what's called laminar flow. So your air is always going out instead of coming in. So when you lift this lid up, the fan starts and starts blowing a HEPA filtered air out of the hood. And then when you close this lid, there's a UV light that comes on automatically and disinfects everything on the inside. So everything we handle for transferring cultures, tubing, lights or lighters, if we're going to use, when we flame the flasks, everything we handle for transferring cultures from one flask to another is kept in here so that UV light disinfects it. So that's these aren't all that expensive. I forget how much this costs, but it's certainly a reasonable expense for a commercial hatchery. If you're having problems with algal contamination in your stockroom, this would be a really good investment to do, because that contamination is occurring when you're transferring from one flask to another. Am I going too fast? Okay. So now we're in what we call the wow room. Because when we open the door and show people this room and they see all these LED lights, they go, wow. So that's the wow room. And we're going to, I got a little, so what I did is so this is a video I shot with my phone. Now, there's a little audio here, but that's not important. But what it is, I walked in the door at the end of this room, and I'm walking down the aisle with my cell phone. So this is our algal production room. Y'all, does anybody grow algae in bags here? Okay, so you got caged bags? We used to do cage bags too, but we couldn't get our cell count above 2 million cells per ml because we thought it was light limiting. We just couldn't, the bags were so large in diameter, we couldn't get enough light to them. So we went to hanging bags, which is a 1 foot diameter bags, and we went from 2 million cells per ml to 6 million cells per ml, just changing the bag diameter. And this is the wall that services the whole system. And I'm going to go into more detail here, and this is where the cultured algae gets stored to get pumped to the room next door where the larvae is. You saw the exterior of this wall earlier when I pointed out the glass. I'm in the education business, so we have informative banners all over the hatchery and what's going on. Our hatchery is open to the public, but we don't always have time to give tours. So if someone walks in and say, hey, we'd like a tour, we say, well, unfortunately, and we're a little busy right now, but if you just walk through and read the banners, it'll tell you everything you need to know. More detail. So again, these are the LED light strips that you can buy online. Because this room is wetter than the stock room, we started having problems with the earlier version of these, which were just peel and stick strips. When they got wet, we were told they were waterproof, so we bought them. And then some of them started shorting out on us. Some of them, a couple of them even caught fire. And they were not saltwater proof. And when we reapproached the supplier with that, he said, well, I didn't say they were saltwater proof. And anyway, so we tore them all out and we bought ones that are in a silicone sleeve with silicone caps on the ends. And that eliminated any of that. But we had to redo all this eventually. So these aren't peel and stick now. These are put on with white cable ties every so often. But what we did do now these are 316 stainless steel racks that were built by a commercial fabricator in New Orleans, and they came down. We had to get the structural engineer of the building that was involved in the building construction tell us where the pads to put the pads, so because he knew exactly where those structural concrete framing was underneath the floor. There's 25. I calculated that there's 25 tons of water in this room. So, and it's elevated. So we had to make sure the pads were right over the structural members of the floor. Otherwise, the whole thing might have punched through the floor. It would have been ugly. But we built all this ourselves. What we did is, I think I got the next one's a close-up, yeah, of this. What this is this is 1 inch by 1 inch fiber grate angle. You can buy this stuff at US Plastics online. It is fiber grade. It's a fiberglass material that they make structural things out of. Unistrut that you might see hanging from a ceiling, all sorts of things. But it's just the fiberglass version of a metal angle, 1 inch by 1 inch. And what we did is we customized, we notched it out. And then I was wondering, how am I going to get this to adhere to a stainless steel pole? I didn't want to drill and tap it because we'd have to use cotton oil, and it probably would have took forever to get the smell of cotton oil out of that room. I went to 3M. 3M adhesive company, and it turns out that they don't use rivets on buses anymore. When they are building buses now, the exterior panels that you see all the advertising on and everything are mounted to the frame of that aluminum bus with adhesive double-sided sticky strip. So I thought, well, if the buses aren't falling apart out in the weather, they sure as hell aren't going to fall apart in this room. And it's true. This stuff, once you got to make sure you put it exactly where you want it, because once you stick it on there, it is not coming off. But it was perfect for what we're doing here. So all we made sure, I just made sure is we wiped each surface down with acetone, so we didn't have our fingerprints on it, and we already had pencil lines drawn exactly where everything was going to go, and we stuck it on there, and it was perfect for this application. So here we have our wires coming off the end of each light strip, and we have a wire trough here. And we can run, let's see, there's 10 on each side, so that's 20 light strips all coming through this wire trough right here for electrical. We did all this wiring ourselves too. Again, we used that same 3M product to stick our wire troughs to the stainless steel column. And then you can see the cable ties right here holding them onto the struts. So these struts are going 9 feet down to the other side of the other end of the rack. And all this, and we had an electrician do this part because I wasn't allowed to do electrical because I'm not a licensed electrician. But anyway, the electricians came in from there, and then they mounted switches on the wall so we can shut the LED light strips off at each 6 racks right here. And then this is just temperature control with the air conditioning here. And we're always wanting to know what their temperature range is 24 hours a day. Just like, have you ever been in a hatchery where fluorescent lights are used and only the light bulbs are downstairs and all the ballasts are upstairs in the attic? Have you ever been to one of those? The idea is you want to remove all that heat. You know, ballasts are very much like a transformer where they're converting voltage from one to the other, and it creates a lot of heat. So you want all that heat out of your algal culture room. So a lot of hatcheries, commercial hatcheries, will have a big sheet of aluminum, plate of aluminum upstairs in the attic where all their ballasts are connected to it, and that aluminum is acting like a heat sink, and it's very warm atmosphere up there because of all that. So what we did is we had all the wires come upstairs to the attic, and these are the transformers that are mounted. So a transformer for each rack. So each transformer handles 20 LED light strips. And then there's a switch on here that's these either can be run, if it's in Europe, it needs to be 220 or at 110. So you just flip a switch and make them all 110 in our case. But you know, these got little fans here blowing because they're putting out a lot of heat. So that's all upstairs in the attic, just like if you were to mount the ballasts upstairs too. And we're finding out that these are lasting about 1.5 years. Now they're starting to go out on us. So we keep, these are $70 a piece online, and we just keep 4 or 5 of them in surplus so we can change these out when they go bad. But so far, the light strips have been holding up real well. They're supposed to be good for 10,000 hours of illumination. Back downstairs in the room in the corner at the end of the video, there you may have seen this blue tank. It used to be neutral, white. But we started, because the sunlight was coming through here, we started getting a lot of blue-green algae growth in it, and it became a pain in the butt to keep it clean. So I just switched the color of it so all that wouldn't occur. But again, here's our pump. Sucking the water. This is water coming in right here. This water's coming in right here from downstairs. And we got a float switch like on the toilet right here that allow water in as needed. And then the pump's sucking it out of here. It's going through a cartridge filter. And then here it goes to what we call a tangential flow filter, hollow tube fibro technology. You familiar? Anyway, what this does, these things are really fragile. You got to mount them and be careful how you handle them. If you drop them, you ruin them. They're kind of pricey, but we got these from GE Health Services, a website. Turns out these are used a lot in labs that are doing medical research to purify the water. And this gets us down to 0.1 microns for our algae water. But again, we're not using, this is an oversized pump. We don't need all that pump, so we're just polishing all the time through here. And then as the water is needed, it goes this way. Comes out here through our tangential flow filter, gets us down to 0.1 micron, goes into this open, there should be a lid on this, goes into this little reservoir, and then this pump is, see, the problem is this doesn't like a lot of back pressure, okay, because these hollow tubes in here, they're fibrous. I forget what material they're made out of, but they're very, very temperamental to high pressure. That's why we have a pressure gauge right here to make sure things don't get out of hand. But what I did my research on these before we plumbed this and realized I could not have this go straight to the heat exchanger. It would have created way too much back pressure and it could have ruined this thing. So what we had to do is send it to a reservoir and then have another pump to set that's the pressure at the heat exchanger for pasteurization. So that's what all this is just water. Take 1.1 micron water, getting sucked back up and sent to the system here. And again, we can control the air everywhere I plumb. I always have a bleed off valve at a pump. So at that bleed off valve, I can control the water pressure whenever I want it to be. I don't have to be so exact on picking pumps. Okay, so this tubing is coming from that pump I just pointed to you, and that goes into the heat exchanger here, and then it goes, and then of course it's about heat exchangers, the water's going in, it goes into the pasteurizer. This is the controller for the pasteurizer. We heat it up to 81 degrees centigrade, the seawater, goes back into the heat exchanger, gets cooled back down to 28, and then it goes to the racks. For water delivery to the racks. These are 2 carboys here. One's for the nutrient F/2, and this is the silica for the diatoms. And these are operated by peristaltic pumps here. I built this on a piece of starboard, and these have their own timers. So this is just plugged into a wall outlet right here, and you can buy these timers at Home Depot. Typical stuff you would. This is the kind of timer that you would put into a wall outlet. So instead of plugging it into the outlet, it's flush with a cover on it. And then you just set the programming up however way you want to dose it, how often you want to dose it. All right, so that's upstairs in the hatchery. Now, one of the things that I started to teach this year in particular was I started teaching this at the Oyster South meeting in Auburn in January, is bottle nurseries. Anybody here have a bottle nursery? Okay, it's new information. The beauty of bottle nurseries, they call them bottle nurseries because you can make them out of a Coke bottle. You can picture this. So you take a Coke bottle and you drink the Coke if you want to. If not, you pour it down the drain. But you can cut the top of the bottle off, becomes a funnel. You flip it upside down. You slip over a piece of the right size acrylic tubing about that deep into the Coke bottle, and you take a heat gun and you hit that plastic bottle with it, and it shrinks to it. And then you drop a marble in it, and it becomes a check valve, and you hook your water up to the bottom, and then it becomes a bottle nursery, a silo. And then you drill a hole up here at the top, and that's your discharge, and the water's coming up through here and coming out. And that's called a bottle silo because you make it out of a Coke bottle or a drink bottle if you want. Now, you can buy these from Fiberglass Build in Sheldon, Washington, $125 a piece. These are fiberglass. He made a mold for these. And then this is acrylic tubing, and they're a lot harder than a thin plastic bottle, which can be punctured very easily. So this is a bottle nursery, and this is a 17 silo nursery. It's got 9 silos on one side and 8 silos on the other, and the only reason not equal is because the bolt sticking out here. But I built this, again, this is the Hurricane plan. It was built with Unistrut, a fiber grate Unistrut on a plastic pallet, so we could haul it out of harm's way. And it turned out I can also wrap this whole thing in shrink wrap, throw it in the back of my pickup truck, strap it in place, and take it anywhere for show and tell. Made a great way for teaching this stuff. So this is one of our nursery tanks, and we never wanted to be in the seed business. Our goal was to help get nurseries started, help get hatcheries started, and then once they become commercial, we back off and support. And we've achieved that already. We got 2 new commercial nurseries going on in Louisiana, buying eyed larvae, they're setting it on microculture, putting it in these bottle nurseries and selling 2mm seed. And so we no longer sell 2mm seed because now there are commercial suppliers for that. But we have this for our own research broods as well. But this is a really, really nice system. This is one of our upwell, downwell tanks. And what I've got is just a submersible pump sitting in there hooked up to this manifold here. Now, the reason why you're drawing off the bottom is because one of the worst things that could happen is you burp a big air bubble through here. It fluidizes the bed and blows all your seed out. Right? So that's why you want to plumb on the bottom, because if any air is forming in that manifold, it's going to be in the top of the manifold, and you're drawing off the bottom where the water is. So that's a neat little feature. Right here are caps. This is all 3/4 inch, by the way. Right here are caps for each one of these, and you got a little valve right here. I like you don't want to use a ball valve here because these are a lot easier for fine tuning. A ball valve, you get a lot or not much at all or too much. They're a lot harder to fine tune than these. These are called, actually, when you buy these in a catalog at an aquarium or a Pentair catalog, these are called globe valves. But one thing I would change here is I put, since there's a T right here, I wanted to be able to drain this and clean it because you can get sediment, because this is raw bay water running through here. This is not filtered water. You can get a lot of sediment build up in here, and then this gets all crummy and anaerobic. But this is a real pain in the butt to take these off and screw them back on. So the newer version I've built, I've got ball valves, cheap ball valves on the bottom here, so you can just open them up and flush all that out, because this can get kind of grungy. So this is a 4-inch manifold. It's got a cap on the end, and then you're coming off with 3/4 inch. Underneath here, all these 3/4 inch pipe going in here is a uniseal. You know what uniseals are? Rubber, black rubber. You drill the right size hole, you plug it up in there, and then when you shove the pipe in there, it expands and seals. So these are all uniseals here, and then it's pretty much simple. It's all 3/4 inch plumbing, and then you've got tubing here, and then you've got a quick connect at each one. This is a side view of it. I made a gutter out of sewer line pipe. I just took a skill saw to it and cut it out. You can buy vinyl gutters at any your favorite supply store and just use a vinyl gutter. I've seen pictures of that on the internet. Let's see what other feature here. So quick connect here and here for the water supply. And this is, again, sewer line pipe going down. And in case you do get an inadvertent burp and you blow the seed out of your silos, you want to have a safety trap right there so you don't permanently lose them. So you got water going through a screen all the time. The beauty of this is when you're setting your culch on microculch, and you're going to be using 225 micron culch, so you're not making lots of doubles and triples. That means that when you go into the nursery with that, you got to go with a 150 or a 200 micron screen in your nursery, and that's in raw bay water. That's going to clog 4 times a day. The whole purpose of this, for me, the reason why I built this is so I didn't have to go in the nursery with a fine mesh. Because now all my silos, now the smallest screen size in these traditional upweller silos are window screen. Everything smaller now is taken. All that smaller mesh is now gone because I'm fluidizing the bed instead of holding them over a screen. And here's the pump that I use that sits in the tank, and you can see it comes over the edge of the tank, and I hook up the that's just 100. That's like a 1/3 horsepower pump. Another look, again, closer look. My first graduate student taught me this. After Hurricane Katrina, I was a wandering soul, and people felt really sorry for me, so they were showing me things they probably wouldn't have in the past, and they let me in their hatcheries and just were extremely helpful. Both coasts, East and West Coast. I got to visit in 2006. I bet I visited 6 hatcheries, trying to I'm going to start over from scratch. If you were to start over from scratch, what would you do different? That was my question to him, and I learned an incredible amount of information. But Greg was one of them, and Greg showed me these things, and I took pictures of his system, and then I probably kept it stored in my computer for 8 years. And when I said, okay, it's time, then I had a few pictures to take. And he's the one who gave me this idea of making these brackets out of 4-inch Schedule 40 pipe. So you slice pipe up, and then you drill holes in it so you can pass a screwdriver through it to screw in the other side. And then you also, so you can use these as your mounts for your, I just happen to have this right here, my newer version now, this is Unistrut, fibergrate Unistrut as well. You can make them out of wood, of course. But I just happen to have some old sheets of starboard around, so I used it. So I cut these up, to frame it all up with. But like I said, the newer version is just more of this stuff here, running horizontal. Again, quick connects. These are 3/4 inch banjos, called Banjo, the brand. I shouldn't use the brand name, but that's what they are. Because you have to take these off and clean them. So you have to have a quick connect to do that. You don't want to have to be picking up a screwdriver every time. Again, you take a slice of 4-inch pipe and then you notch it. And what this does is just snaps in place. It's elegant. It really is. And then so you disconnect your water flow on the bottom. You should close off your valve. You disconnect it, and then you just pull this out and lift it up, and you got it to clean and handle. The holes in here on this this is acrylic tubing. there's a gasket right here for this discharge right here, and that's a piece of silicone tubing. And it makes a perfect gasket for this. And if you order these from Fiberglass Bill, it comes with them. Again, you can see right here's the gutter receiving the water from all the silos. A closer up view of all these connections here. These are just tapered. The actual bottom of the silo is not threaded. So what I did is I wiped this down with acetone, and then I took this piece of 3/4 inch tubing. I cut it exactly the length so that this barb, this is the male end of a quick connect, and it's got a barb fitting on it for the tubing, and I got that nestled in right up against the bottom of that silo, and then I heated this up with a heat gun and pushed it on there while it was hot, and then when it cooled, it set real nice and tight, and then I put a hose clamp on it, and they have not come off. Same thing with this. You heat all this up and it slips on real nice, and when it cools, it's real tight. Same thing here. So, you know, y'all know that. So, even a closer look of it all. And this is your marble. It's 25 millimeter marble. You can buy them online. I already checked Hobby Lobby. You can't get them there. But you drop this in and it sits on the bottom, and it's your check valve. So when your water's coming up through, it lifts up, and when you shut the water off, it sinks down and keeps everything from washing out. And I've got a video on one more. So the idea is if you have we have a 17 bottle silo system, and we have one extra. So when you're cleaning these, you can run them over a grading screen. If you're washing out, see what we'll do is we'll spat our culch, and then once this culch is spatted, we rinse it into the bottle silo. We fluidize that bed, and over about 4 days, what happens is brown zone starts to occur. So the culch, as you saw in an earlier picture, was beige. You start seeing this brown zone occurring, and that is the spat growing up out of the culch as the culch bed is fluidized. And that brown zone gets thicker and thicker and thicker. In about 5 days, you can run that over your favorite screen. I use a 425. Some people use a 300. And you just wash the culch out of your spat. And all you have left for spat, you can dry the culch out and reuse it. And so this whole system here is set up to where you use a big drum funnel that you would use on a plastic drum or a metal drum. You can get these at Granger. It gives you plenty of working area here, and you just set up your spare, your clean bottle here, and then you rinse your spat here, and then you can pour all that down in here and then plug it into the system. Then you take the dirty one, you pressure wash it clean, plug it in there, and then you do your next one. You just go right down the line, and you end up with one dirty when you clean it, and you're ready for the next time you go through the system. These are real nice screen bodies that you can get from Bill as well. So that's how we grade our seed and set up to refill the bottles, silos. Is this it? Yeah, this is it. Let me. I got it. Yeah. I wanted to show you this. So this is a 1 minute video of how you fluidize the bed. So you got your water flows coming in from the bottom right here, obviously. And your marbles are spinning right here. You can see those right here? They spin as the water is flowing by them. And this fluidizing the bed, that's about how you want it fluidized. And what's happening, and you can see the seed working its way down on the outside, and it's bulging up it's coming up, fluidizing up through the center from the water source. So you can see the slow movement of seed right here. This bottle right here, I happen to know because that's the day I cleaned it and counted, had 250,000 seed in it. And 3 days later, it was about to come out the top. I mean, it depends, of course, on your water source, but the seed for our nursery here, they grow extremely fast. I mean, I've left on a Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock and had all this clean and the seed at this level, and went home for the weekend and told the girls who's working the weekend, oh, you don't have to do much of that. Just make sure the marbles are spinning. When I came back on Monday morning at noon, well, it was noon on Monday, so it was Saturday, Sunday, 3 days later, everything was full and starting to come out, blow out into the gutter up above. They grow extremely fast. So basically what you're doing is you're fluidizing the bed, and they're in there rolling, and they're in there feeding as they're doing that, and they just, and you can almost pull up a chair and watch this thing get deeper and deeper and deeper. It's incredible. I highly recommend, if you're going to be in the seed business, I highly recommend one of these. And I even got a little numbers for you. This is what I call back of the envelope. I did this for my talk at Auburn in January. So the idea is you want to produce 1 million 2-millimeter seed. So your capital cost of building this thing, so you're going to buy 11 silos from Bill, okay? And that's how much the 11 silos is going to cost you with shipping. You got your 3/4 horsepower pump you're going to drop into a tank as a supply pump. And here's all the plumbing for the rack. Here's the rack itself. This is the plastic pallet and the unistrut. And then you're going to, I'm assuming this is a brand new nursery business, so you don't have any sieves yet. So you're going to buy some sieves from Granger, some small 12-inch stainless steel sieves. You're going to have a 225, a 500, and a 1000 or a 1 millimeter. Your setting trays for doing static sets. You know, we're doing static sets now where we're taking a seafood tray, a round plastic seafood tray that you would eat boiled seafood on or pick crabs on, and we're covering that with just a small thickness of culch, and then we're just covering that with just a little bit of seawater, and then we're pouring the larvae over top of that, and it's what we call a static set. No air, no down well, no nothing. And then once they set on that, we're rinsing that into the bottle silo. So the setting trays are next to nothing really, but I put $200 for that. These static sets are working. The tricky part is it's your hatchery manager. Those larvae have to be hot to trot. You have to get those larvae so hot that they are setting almost overnight. So you got to pick the right harvest screen. And for triploids, there has to be a larger harvest screen than the diploids because they grow larger. So I recommend, at least from our hatchery, we're using a 310, 320 harvest screen for the triploid larvae. We're using a 280 for the diploid. Yeah. Anyway, so the idea is that you're harvesting only the competent pedivelagers that are ready to set, and anything that falls through, you're putting back in the tank and feed it another 24 hours and harvest it again tomorrow. But you've got to get these things very, very competent for a static set to work. But it works well if you got really good larvae. Labor, if you can find anyone to work for 12.5 an hour, there it is. Actually, I came up with $100 a day. A deckhand in Louisiana working on any boat, shrimp boat, oyster boat, doesn't matter. A deckhand makes $100 cash a day. That's the going rate. So I just figure, okay, one deckhand, that's the price of a deckhand for 8-hour day. That works out. They're making $12.50 an hour if you can get them to work 8 hours. Threw in an extra $100 for miscellaneous winning. You know, so you can build one of these for about $3,300, just like the picture I showed you. But it only has 10 silos instead of 17. And then if you have that doesn't count the nursery tank I was pulling water out of, so you get a plastic tank for $250, but it doesn't include all these costs. You got to have a pump drawing water from the bay to get it into the tank. That's not in there, and all your depreciation and property costs and principal and interest if you borrowed money and all that stuff. And here's how much it costs to produce 1 million seed. We were selling triploid larvae at $300 a million, so you need 5 million larvae. You're assuming a 20% set, so that's the price for the larvae. You're not going to use 10 pounds of culch, but you buy 10 pounds of culch basically for the season, and you can buy that from a guy in Virginia, and he'll ship it to you at $10 a pound, already graded. I don't want to grind shell. Do you? Okay. Fortunately, there's a guy up there that's in the business of grinding shells, so you just give him your business. You're going to spend about $300. Anytime you're running pumps, you're going to spend about $300 a month on electricity. Again, there's your labor. So it's going to cost you about $2,100 to set 5 million larvae to make 1 million 2 millimeters. Now, if you got clear water, our water's extremely green right now. You can wade out in waist deep in our water right now in the bay where the farm is, stick your hand up to your elbow, and you can't see your fingers. That's how green it is. And that is oyster food. And we've got, for a nursery, we have a fantastic site. We're more challenged keeping the weeds out of the garden upstairs in the hatchery but for a raw bay water for a nursery, it's an excellent site. But if you got clear water, there's no food in the water, so you got to add algae. And you can buy algae by the bottle. And you can set this whole rack over top of a tank and just recirculate it, like this and then change the water, do partial water changes out of the tank. You could do this inshore. You could. But here's the algae. I don't use this stuff, but Scott Reichert at Auburn does and is successful with it. It's going to cost you about $50 a quart. And to produce 1 million seed, I estimated you're going to go through about 2 quarts. So for this amount of seed. So this might be too low. The lead scientist for reed mariculture. You familiar with Shellfish Diet? Any of y'all use it? It's produced by Reed Mariculture out of California. Their head scientist's name is Eric Henry. You may have seen him at trade shows. I'm picking him up from New Orleans on Monday, and I'm driving him down to our hatchery in Grand Isle. He's going to spend the night at our camp. We're going to throw a shrimp bowl in his honor, and we're going to learn a hell of a lot about that guy, about how using his product, because Scott's growing larvae. He doesn't grow any algae at all at his hatchery at Auburn and Dauphin Island, and he's successful with it. I've tried it, and I didn't think much of it. We'll use it sometimes to feed broodstock, but I never have thought much of it for the larvae. But obviously Scott's onto something, and it won't hurt me one bit to learn how. So this doesn't include sea salt, insurance, accounting. You know, accountants don't work for nothing, but that's not in there. This is off their webpage. This is Shellfish Diet. This is a very common product from their company that you use for shellfish hatcheries. And Bill Walton and Scott Reichert have produced a little fact sheet that's available online. If you go to Reed Mariculture and look up Shellfish Diet, down in the bottom right, you'll see a link for their PDF file, and you'll get this thing. It'll tell you how to use this stuff, the feeding protocols and all that. I'm not going to go into all that much detail with it, but this would be great for a bottle nursery. There's a picture I didn't include on here, but I took off the internet, and it shows a bottle nursery rack sitting above on top of a tank, and they're using cultured algae in the tank. But the all day is they're just pumping water from the tank back down, and you do partial water changes. But I see no reason at all why this won't work. And by the time I take Eric to the airport on Tuesday, I'll know all about it. That'll be the best shrimp ball I ever put on. I'm almost done. All right, where's our prop? So everything's going hunky-dory this season. We start up in February. We're cranking out lots of larvae. Everything's great. We start filling our orders, and then all of a sudden, all the larvae start dying. April 24th. Like I remember like it was yesterday. So, you know, the first thing you always think about, it's in the water. Well, we're polishing the hell out of that water. I don't know how anything could get through what we got going there. So I happened to notice this right here. This clamp used to be right here to kind of tone down the airflow to this air stone hanging in a hatching tank. That's black soot. Now, the only place the air is coming from a manifold that's going all the way to the blower. So the only place that this soot can come from is the blower. So black soot. Well, I had this experience before, and did any of you hear me talk in Harbor Branch? How many years ago was that? 2 years ago? Anybody there? Okay. Well, I'm going to go over that experience too. I saw this before when we were operating under the old boat shed after Hurricane Gustav, and I knew immediately what it was. Now, y'all smelled this, right? Pretty harmless. Smell it now. When black rubber, heats up, have y'all smelled like someone's burning tires 2 blocks away? It's very characteristic. It is deadly to larvae. Deadly. And I went and I found, I said, where's this black soot coming from? And when you buy a blower, a brand new blower, and you open up the box, that is in the box for you to hook up to your manifold. And you think it's harmless because it came with the blower. So here's a tandem blower right here. We have one blower. This is the blowers for our algae room because we have a really deep water depth. So if you buy a blower, so rather than buy a big blower to try to get the water depth we need and it overheats and gets terribly hot, you buy a smaller blower and you blow one blower. Y'all know about this? to keep the same air volume, but to get a deeper water depth, you just size up 2 blowers and you blow one into the other blower. And then that second blower blows to your system. It gives you twice the water depth for the same volume of air without having to have this huge blower. Anyway, so this is a picture of our tandem blower for our algae room. And here it is right there. And we had one, an interview blower in the house. And as soon as I saw that, I said, I know exactly what's killing us larvae now because I saw that black soot. And the black soot is just a reminder that you run a hatchery on observations. You use your senses to run a hatchery. Your eyes, your ears, your nose, everything. So that, now, this is right here. You know what this is for? That's to blow off excess back pressure. Every blower should have one. Right after the blower, you should have this here to blow off excess back pressure, because that keeps this all from running too hot, because it's back pressure that causes heat, friction and heat. It's fighting the back pressure trying to blow out the unit. And this is to keep the hiss down. You know, if you didn't have this air stone on here, the hiss would be just ear shattering. So you put these on to muffle it. What happened is this clogged. The back pressure increased. This got hot. The rubber scorched, and it started putting out that gas, scorched rubber. And that's what was our problem was. So once I realized what that was going on, and then take a look at these. It turned out, what was weird is our hatching tanks, we couldn't grow any larvae in hatching. They get up to about 100 micron. The classic symptom of larvae for toxicity is they'll hatch out, they'll grow a little bit, maybe 90 up to 100 microns, and they stop growing. And then you just slowly die off. It's just this dreadful death, and you got days to figure out what the hell's going wrong. That's a classic symptom of toxicity to larvae, that kind of growth and mortality. And what I started noticing is, now we couldn't get any larvae to grow in these hatching tanks. We couldn't get any larvae to survive in our flow through system. And I noticed, see how dark this was? These are filling up with soot too. These are bleed off valves. You have a bleed off valve in front of the blower to get rid of back pressure, but then you also have bleed off valves at the end of your manifolds to control your air pressure in the whole manifolds. You can open this and close this to adjust the amount of bubbles you got coming out of your air stones. It's classic way if you plumb airlines. But you see how dark these was? These were getting soot in them too. And what was weird is here's the air manifold to our research tanks. And I just capped this off because there's not a whole lot of air going to the system. We were able to grow all kinds of larvae in this up to setting size in these small research tanks, but we couldn't keep anything to survive in the other tanks. And the reason why, and I'll go back again, is because of these air stones, air is like water. It flows through the path of least resistance. So most of the air coming from that blower was coming out these two air stones, but it was hitting that cap on that manifold, so there wasn't a whole lot of air blowing through there. So the only explanation, and it took me, why can we go? It's usually just the opposite. Our production broods in our big tanks, we can puke out like crazy, but our research broods are just so challenging because small broods are a lot harder to grow than big broods. Especially research broods when you're growing triploids and tetraploids and the numbers keep dropping because of their mutants, and you end up with just 1,000 larvae, but that's a success on a research level. But it was just the opposite. All the small broods we could keep going, but the larger broods we couldn't grow. And it finally dawned on me when I saw the black soot, and I started wondering why. It's because there was more air blowing to these tanks than the other, and the air was laced with that gas that you smell when I got the rubber hot. So if I didn't see the black soot, I'd still be pulling my hair out. It's all about observations. And if I leave you with anything, you walk through a hatchery every day just looking. Because especially algae, when you walk through an algae room, just look through. I'll open up the stock room, I'll look at it, and I'll close it. When I look back in that room 4 hours later, it better damn well look different. Everything should be darker than the last time I looked at it. Every bag I looked at 3 hours ago should be a little bit darker than the last time I looked at it, because things are supposed to be growing. And when algae grows, it gets darker because the cell count goes higher. So just taking a quick look at things, everything, and because you're going to remember it. And if something looks odd, there's a reason. And if you see black soot in your airlines, now you know what's going on. And we immediately went in and we just direct plumbed everything. We took all these rubber couplings out of there and just plumbed it directly to PVC pipe. Now, another reason why I want to show you this is you got to let your blowers breathe. I have seen many times where I walk into a hatchery or a nursery or a spat-on shell remote setting operation, and this blower has a 1-inch discharge, and it got 1-inch pipe going all the way up there. You are choking this blower. You got to I like to come out as soon as I can past this bleed-off valve, double the size of the pipe, the manifold. You got to let them breathe, because when this gets hot, your bearings overheat, and you're going to get a fraction of the life out of that blower if you don't let it run cooler. So what I teach people to do is when this blower is running and everything's set up and your air bubbles coming out of all your air stones downline are just the way you want it, you should be able to go up and touch that, put your hand on that blower. And that's going to feel hot, but it's hot enough that we can keep your hand on it. Okay. If you put your hand on it, you want to jerk it off because it's scorching hot, you got a problem. And if you got rubber right there, you got a serious problem, because that rubber is putting out gas, and it's going to kill your larvae, or you're going to your production level. You're not going to reach your production levels you were because you got this contaminated air. So this was just one little thing I wanted to show you here. It's a lesson I learned. And back in 2007, 2008, when I first saw black soot in airlines, it was right after Hurricane Katrina, and we rebuilt our shed and we started operating again. And instead of having one big 2 horsepower blower running through the whole shed, I went to having individual blowers on each system. And I had a friend of mine convince me to go to these linear air pumps. Well, that's when these overheated. They have rubber, these are replacement kits for these. These are rubber diaphragms that pulse back and forth as a rubber diaphragm for air pump. These will overheat and do the same thing as that piece of rubber you handled. So I no longer have any rubber in the hatchery. I have no air diaphragm blowers. They're all regenerative blowers, even down to 8 horsepower. Even the littlest blower for that stock room is a regenerative blower with a vane in it. So I'm just, if you take anything from this talk, beware of rubber in your air system in a hatchery. Now I'm done.